morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second webinar in this series since COVID has started. I'm delighted that, as last time, we're joined today by Jackie Mann, who runs a company called Jackie Mann Associates, but perhaps more importantly for our sector, runs HR for nurseries. Many of you would have met Jackie on our previous session. But if you haven't, she is an expert in all things HR and recruitment, and is also the author of the book Recruit, Inspire and Retain. So I think it's probably best to get started, and we'll ask Jackie to come on and give us her presentation, which I think is about 20 minutes or so. And then afterwards, we'd welcome any calls from any of you, and Jackie will do her best to answer those questions. So I think without further ado, we'll just hand on over to Jackie. Jackie, I can't see you on my screen, so hopefully you can unmute yourself and we can move on.
I can't unmute myself.
Actually came for that long though, and then no.
So right, okay, that's it. We're here. Everybody hear me? Good morning, everyone. So are we going to the first slide then, Alan? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Alan?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jackie.
Oh, you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you, Jackie, fine, and you should have your first slide on the screen.
No. Okay, so we're going to talk about restructuring and redundancy. We've been talking to lots of nursery owners at the moment, business owners, about what they're going to do about bringing staff back to work. We don't have all the details of the new furlough scheme yet, but some people are going to be looking at restructuring. And when we talk about restructuring, that means we're looking at potential redundancies. And I think that's what people are wanting to get some information about. So what I want to do today is to give you sort of a brief overview of what restructuring is and how to go about any redundancies if you feel that you're going to have to reduce the number of staff that you've got. Okay, so can I have the next slide, Alan, please?
Yeah, of course. How's that?
Brilliant, okay. So we've got restructuring and redundancy, and often when people say they need to restructure the business, that is a way of making people redundant. It's just a different way of saying, really, that they want to make people redundant. But I think what I'm finding is, and you may find this yourselves with your business, is that during this time, it's give business owners an opportunity to rethink their business and to decide on actually if what they've currently had in their business, the structure that they had with all the staff that they had, is this now an opportunity to change that? And we are finding quite a few people who are saying, actually, do you know what? Sometimes it might be a reason because there's people there that you now think this is a good opportunity to say goodbye to those people. But other times it can be a case of looking at the business and saying, how can we make this work better? We need to reduce our costs. We need to look at different ways that we can save some money, but work more efficiently. And it might mean changing people's roles slightly, and it might mean saying goodbye to people, which is where the redundancy comes in. So if you've got staff who you are going to potentially be making redundant, they qualify for redundancy pay if they've actually been with you for 2 years. They need 2 years service to actually qualify for any payment. But that doesn't mean you can't still let them go through the redundancy process, which I'll explain a little bit more about later on. And then we also need to look at alternatives to redundancy. And of course, one of the big alternatives at the moment is the furlough scheme. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So if I could have the next slide, Alan, please.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So if you are going to be restructuring, you need to really have a good plan to start with. Now, I often see people who will suddenly start saying, oh, we need to get rid of people, this person can go, we need to restructure here, but there's no real plan or timelines or anything in place to start with. So you need to start with a plan. And the first thing you need to look at is, what is your business case? So the business case is, what's the reason why you're going to be restructuring? So for instance, I was talking to a nursery owner yesterday. She's looking at changing one of her regional managers to become a manager for a room, sorry, a manager for a setting. And the manager that's in there at the moment, we're looking at potentially removing that position. So there's various different ways that you can do it, but you need to have a good reason as to why you're doing these things. Obviously, COVID-19 is a real good reason why businesses are having to look at restructure and lose staff and look at different ways of doing things. So the business case is the first thing you need to think about. So when you put your plan together, it needs to have your timeline in it. So when are you going to announce what your business case is? Because what you need to do with that is you need to announce that to the whole of the business as to, this is what's going to be happening. These are the reasons why, and we feel that potentially there will be, and you say how many redundancies there's going to be, or any new positions or restructuring that there's going to be, and how many roles are actually affected. After you've done your announcement, you need to leave at least 48 hours to then invite the people that are affected by this into a one-to-one consultation meeting. And in that one-to-one consultation meeting, you need to explain to them the reasons why their role potentially could be redundant, any alternatives you've got, and the reason why they've been selected. So these things are really, really important, because if you don't follow a fair process, then you could find yourselves facing unfair dismissal claims in tribunals. So you need to make sure that you're following a very fair process. And one of the ways to do that is to have selection pools and have a selection criteria. So when I say a selection pool, let's use the example of nursery assistants. So say you want to reduce the amount of nursery assistants you've got. So let's say, for example, you've got 6 and you want to go down to 4. So you would need to put all 6 of those people into a pool, and then you would need to have a selection criteria which each of them would get scored against. And then the ones that have got the lowest scores would be the people that would be potentially at risk of redundancy. So the bottom 2 effectively would be the ones at risk of redundancy. Now those people, you have to consult with them. We have to consult with them all. There's different ways to do it. And I'm sort of giving you the basic way here, but you would need to consult with them, explain to them why they've got the lower score and that potentially their role is redundant. Now, when you're looking at your selection criteria, you need to really think about the business here and make sure that your criteria is going to suit, so that you end up keeping the people you want, because it's not very good if you then end up with the people that you didn't want. So there is a bit of a science in it. So making sure you've got the right criteria that was going to give you the right result. One of the things you can't use, if you've got anyone that's got a disability, you can't use absence as a selection criteria, because if that person's absence is high, and the reason their absence is high is because they've got a disability which caused them to have time off, then you will be facing an automatically unfair dismissal and potentially discrimination for disability. So you can't use absence for that. But there's lots of things you can use. You know, you can use supervisory, you can read reports, you can use performance reviews, you can use time, you know, if they're late for coming to work, if anybody's got any disciplinaries against them. You could look at what qualifications people have got. So there's lots and lots of different criteria, but you just need to make sure it's something that you can score against quite easily, so that people can see, and that you can give a reason as to why people have either got a high score or got a low score. So hopefully that explains selection criteria and pools. Bumping is something that you may not come across, but you just need to be aware of it. So for example, say you've got a manager and a deputy manager, and you want to remove, or you might say have two managers, you want to remove a manager, and she might turn around and say, well, actually, I could do the deputy manager's job, so she needs to be put at risk as well because I'm prepared to take that job. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. So you just have to be aware if someone, because often you think when someone's in a higher position and with a higher status and higher salary, that they wouldn't be considered to be in the same pool. So if you do come across that, then I suggest advice about that because it's a bit more complicated. And it was actually made a tribunal case by an HR person, would you believe? An HR manager was going to be made redundant, and she said she could do the HR advisor's role. And the HR advisor was one that ended up getting made redundant because the HR manager then took her role. So it can be done that way. Hopefully you won't come across it. I say if you do, take some advice on that one. Okay, next slide, Alan, please. Okay, so these are some of the things you need to be aware of. So discrimination, I have spoke about disability. You need to be careful if you're selecting people for redundancy at all, that you're not discriminating against them. So that can be age, sex, so all of the protected characteristics. So if, for example, you've got a setting where you've got females and one male, because there's not many males in the industry, and if you were going to have a selection pool and the person that you were going to make redundant ended up being the male, then you could find yourself facing a discrimination claim. So you need to make sure that you've got some really good criteria. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but just make sure that you know exactly what your criteria is. The length of service, these days you've got to be really careful on people who have got a long length of service, because if you've got, how can we say, someone who's been with you quite a few years, it's going to be expensive to make these people redundant. And I've had a few people who've not quite understood how expensive it's going to be because of the redundancy payments and the notice payments. The notice payments is the bit that's really going to sting people if you do need to make someone redundant. Selection criteria for last in, first out is not seen as good practice these days. Tribunals don't like it. You used to be able to say last in, first out. Actually, it's not good, and it's also not good for the business, because sometimes the last person that you got into the business may be the one that you would prefer to keep rather than someone that's been there quite a long time. Notice payments are something that this is where a lot of people have been confused. So in your contracts of employment, you've most likely got a statutory notice payment that you will need to make for employees, and that is actually 1 week for every year of service. So it's not a month, as a lot of people seem to think it is. You've probably got in your contracts that employees have to give you a month's notice if they want to leave, or 4 weeks notice. Occasionally we've got some people who've got 3 months in there, but not very many. But you as the employer have to, even if you just say in your contract you're only going to give them a month's notice, legally you can't do that. The statutory entitlement is 1 week for every year of service. So I had somebody, a nursery owner I was talking to the other day, and he was wanting to make a nursery manager redundant who'd been with him for 16 years. The maximum notice you have to give is 12 weeks. So because she's got 16 years service, he's got to pay her 12 weeks notice. Now that's at full pay. Okay, so that's not at a reduced amount, that's at full pay. And there's nothing you can do about that. You have to pay it, as well as the redundancy payment. So it's not a statutory, it's not a notice payment or a redundancy payment, it's both. So redundancies are not always, if you've got someone who's got a long service, it's not always the easy option. It can be expensive. You also need to make sure that you've got holidays included in that, so that you've got to pay for any holidays that are outstanding, that they've accrued. And depending on what your contract says, you might be able to get them to use their holidays while they're on notice. Excuse me. And again, unfair dismissal, you need to be really careful that you're not being unfair to anyone, that you're treating everybody the same. But again, they need 2 years service to actually bring an unfair dismissal claim. So I hope that's covered off that. I'll be answering any questions about any of these things that you've got as at the end of this. Can I have the next slide, Alan, please?
Of course.
Thank you. Right, so consultation period. Now, it will depend on how many people that you're making redundant as to how long your consultation period needs to be. So we've got our business case and we've got our timeline. So the timeline, what you should be doing in that is say, right, okay, so we're going to do the business case, let's say next Monday. 2 days after that, we'll start our first consultation meetings. And then a minimum that you can do, if you've got less than 20 people that you're going to make redundant, is a week. So a week's consultation is the minimum. You might want to extend that slightly, depending on how many people you've got to see. So the idea of a consultation, and it's quite difficult at the moment, obviously, because a lot of people are not on site. So you can do them like this on Zoom. So that's what we're recommending people to do. If you've got people on furlough, you can start consultation meetings now and do them over Zoom. So you need to make sure that in the consultation that they understand the reason for the redundancy and the reason why their role is potentially at risk. So explain to them who they're in the pool with, if they are in a pool. Now, if you've only got one person doing that role, then there is no pool and you don't need your selection criteria. It's just that role is no longer going to be there. So you don't need it. It's when you've got more than one person doing the same type of job. So you explain how many people are at risk and you explain how they've been selected. So that's through the selection criteria. Now you need to show people their scoring system and the selection criteria. You only need to show them their own. You don't need to show them everyone else's, but you show them their own. And then you say to them that because of the selection criteria and potentially because they've got the lowest scores, then their role is most likely at risk. Consultation means then you say, do they have any ideas of how you could potentially save that role? Is there any other things they can come up with? Now, it could be you're open to looking at job sharing. It could be open to reducing the hours. You know, they might come up and say, well, could I go down to just 2 or 3 days a week rather than being full time? Would that help the business if I did that, if I could still keep my job? So there's lots of different options. And you need to look at those and consider all of them if they come up with them. So during the week of consultation, a minimum of a week, so it could be longer. You can do it for 2 weeks. You can, as long as you're having a meaningful consultation and you're not breaking any of the rules. And I'm assuming that nobody will be making anyone more than 20 people redundant. If you are, there is a different process and it's a longer consultation period. You also need to get employee reps. It gets more complicated. So if you do have to do that, then I can have a chat to you about that at a later stage. So during the consultation period, they're not normally at work, and obviously if they're on furlough, they aren't, but they should be able to get in touch with you to say, I've got these ideas. What about this? Could we try looking at this? Sometimes people get together. You might say you've got one full-time position and 2 people role is at risk of redundancy. They might say, actually, we're prepared to job share, and you'd need to consider that as well, so that both of them keep a job, and the one job will go, but both of them keep a job and share that job. So that's something you would need to consider. And because you've done your timeline already, you know when the next meeting is going to be. Confirm that with them to say, we'll meet again in a week's time. We'll discuss any other options that you've got. And then we'll make a decision at that meeting as to whether your role is going to be redundant. And you need to make sure you follow up all these meetings with letters so that there's no confusion as to what's happening. Because in my experience, I've unfortunately had to make lots of people redundant. And once you get into that conversation of your role is potentially redundant, people tend to switch off because their emotions take over. They may behave very strangely in a way that you're not expecting because they will be upset. I've had things thrown at me before. I've had lots of people in tears. It's often handy to have a box of tissues in the room because you don't know how many people are going to, be upset or swear at you, get really angry. Because even though when you're making someone redundant, the role is what's at risk, the people still take it personally because you can't help it. I mean, if any of you have ever been made redundant, you do feel like it's you, you can't help that. It's a human nature thing. So once you've got the timescales, you would explain to them that that's when the decision will be made. Explain there is no decision has been made yet. We're in consultation and we're talking about which roles are at risk. Yours potentially is, and we need to make sure that we consult and we'll make our decision later in the week's time or the end of your consultation period. So they'll get that confirmed in writing. You would need to explain to them, give them a sheet of paper that will tell them what their redundancy payment is if they're entitled to one. If they've been with you for less than 2 years, then they're not entitled to any payment, but you need to calculate out redundancy payment for them so they know what to expect. And also they then get the right to appeal against that decision. Next slide, Alan, please.
Well done.
Okay, brilliant. So I've talked about some of these things here. So statutory payments versus contractual, I haven't spoke about, and this gets very confusing. So a redundancy payment is a statutory payment that people are entitled to when they get made redundant. A statutory payment is capped at £538 a week. Okay, that's the maximum anybody can get. So if you've got someone who's earning 35,000, then they aren't going to get their actual week's pay. So say their entitlement to redundancy is 6 weeks pay, then they aren't going to get their actual week's pay. They'll get 6 times £538. Now, sometimes people are confused about this because they say, well, that's not right. I was expecting more money than that because I should be getting 6 weeks pay. Yes, 6 weeks statutory pay. Now, unless you've got something different in your contracts which says you will pay actual pay for redundancies, which is probably highly unlikely, tends to be big corporates that have those in, and not many of those have those in today. So the maximum people can get is £538. So you've got 2 scenarios here. You've got people who are on a high salary who expect to get more money because they earn more. Then you get people who are on a lower salary who only earn, say, £200 a week. And they say, well, this isn't right because I'm supposed to get £538 a week. And they think that's the statutory payment and that's what they should get. But you only get that if you earn that or above it. So if you earn less than the £538, then you will get your actual payment. So I hope that makes sense because lots of people get confused because they've worked out what they think their redundancy payment is when they come into the meeting. And then when you say this is your redundancy payment, they're like, that's not right. Because it's not your actual payment, it's a statutory payment. And it will depend on the person's age as to whether they get half a week's pay, a full week's pay, or a week and a half's pay. So this is the only time when discrimination is allowed to happen, because if you're younger, you only get half a week. And if you're older, you get 1.5 weeks. So discrimination works better for older people in this case, but not normally. Spoken about job share, suitable alternative. So when you're making someone redundant, you need to say to them, we do have what we believe is a suitable alternative for you. So your role is no longer going to be here, but we have what we believe is a suitable alternative. So you might have, say you've got a manager in your setting, you might have a different role for them as a manager doing, perhaps looking at the curriculum. So looking at different ways that you might need them to do a different job. It needs to have the same type of salary and the same type of level of status. So it wouldn't be a suitable alternative if you had a manager and you put them down to be like a supervisor level, because they would be losing their status then. So that wouldn't be considered a suitable alternative. But you can speak to people. So it could be, you could have someone who's at a manager level and you might have a training manager role that you want to introduce. A similar status, similar salary. You could say, you know, your role is being made redundant, but we do have this training manager role, which we think you'd be great at. And it's a similar salary, so we believe it's a suitable alternative. So if they agree to that, then they don't get their redundancy payment and they keep their job, and they get a trial period of 4 weeks, and that's a legal requirement. So they get a trial period of 4 weeks. During that time, it's for either party to say, do you know, I don't think this job is right for me. It's really not for me. You could also use suitable alternative. It could be the same job, but a different setting. So you've got, it might be that it's further for them to commute, harder for them to get to work. So it could take them longer. It might cost them more money if they've got to take childcare, all those different things. But that could be seen as a suitable alternative. If at the end of the trial period that you feel it's not right for them and they feel it's not right, either way, it doesn't have to be both, then they would still get their redundancy money. So that would normally be what a suitable alternative would be. However, at the moment, furlough is also considered a suitable alternative. So what we're recommending people to do now is, if you think that you're going to need to make people redundant, bearing in mind how long someone's notice period is going to be. So if you've got someone who's on 7 or 8 weeks notice, then you might want to look at saying to them, okay, your role is going to be redundant, work out your timescales so that you can use the furlough scheme to top up the notice period. So you can't use furlough for redundancy payment, but you can use furlough for your notice, but you would need to top it up to 100%. So that's one way of keeping people employed longer, in a way, so that they're still getting some money and using the furlough scheme, which is what the government intended it for, so that they've got longer to do that, but also helping the business to be able to see that you can save some money that the government will be paying. And it's going to depend on what percentage you're getting at the moment from the government. But you will be able to use part of that to top it up so that you can use that for your notice periods. There's also the right to be accompanied. Now, if you look on all the legal information, it will say there is no right to be accompanied for people going to a redundancy meeting, not a statutory right. However, it's one of those anomalies with employment law, because everyone has a statutory right to be accompanied by a trade union rep or an employee. That's all, if there is a possibility that they might be dismissed. Now, if you're going through a consultation, the first meeting that they come to for redundancy, they aren't going to be dismissed because it's just a potential you could be redundant. At the second meeting, if they are going to be redundant, they are going to be dismissed. Redundancy is a dismissal. So they could be accompanied to that one. My recommendation is you just let people be accompanied to them all. Not everybody will take up the option, but it would be considered a much fairer process, because on the second meeting, they do have that, or second or third, sometimes you do have more than 2 consultation meetings, but they would have the right to be accompanied if they're going to be dismissed. So to me, I think best practice is you just invite people to say they can be accompanied right from the beginning, from the consultation meeting. And there's other things to consider as well, because if you've got someone who's quite emotional, they don't always understand, or they're not always able to remember what you've said to them. So if they've got someone with them, they can explain to them afterwards. Also, if English is not someone's first language, that also is helpful to have someone else there. And also if you've got anyone that's got a disability, so you need to take that into consideration as well. And of course, there will be the right to appeal. So you'll need to make sure that you've got someone that's going to be able to take the appeals if you are going to be dismissing people through redundancy. The appeal really needs to be a different person that's heard the actual consultation and done the redundancy process, if possible. If you haven't got anyone else more senior in the business to do that, then that isn't possible, but that would be looked at a tribunal if you hadn't used different levels. So as part of your planning that you do is look to see who would be doing the consultation meetings and who would that leave for appeal. My suggestion would always be that it should be the most senior person that's left to do the appeals. If you've got anybody in the company that is not a very good people person and you think they might say the wrong thing at the wrong time, definitely leave them for the appeal, because they might not get used at all. They might put their foot in it if they're doing consultation meetings. So sometimes I don't allow some managers to do consultation meetings because I think they'll cause more trouble than anything else. Okay, can I go on to the next slide, Alan, please?
There you go.
So I've spoken a little bit about this. Furlough, you can consult with employers while they're, when people are starting to come back from furlough, and as we know, the furlough rules are starting to change, but you can start consultation with people while they're on furlough, and you can have Zoom meetings with them. don't have to do it online. If you do want to bring people in, then you can, but obviously you need to make sure you've got the social distancing. It's useful doing it on Zoom as well if they do want to have someone with them, because you can invite the other person onto the Zoom call as well. And then you can see who it is, because then you can make sure that you've got a copy of what actually happened at the session as well. The furlough payments, I've said, you can use it to pay the notice period, but you will need to pay notice at 100%. And any holidays that people have accrued, you will also need to pay at 100% as well. But furlough payments cannot be used for redundancy payments, so you will have to pay any redundancy payment yourself. Okay, so last but one slide, Alan, just a few ways that we can help you. We've put together a redundancy support package for people if they really need different, if they're struggling to make people redundant and go through the process. It is difficult. Lots of different letters, lots of different things you have to put in place. So we've put a package together for that. If it's a larger project, or you feel that you really would like much more than a template package and some phone calls, then we can work with you on a project basis, or you can join us as one of our retained clients, and obviously that comes as part of the process. So if you would like any more information about that, I'm happy to chat to you about it, or you can drop me an email. My email's there, or give us a call at the office, and we can talk about what those costs would look like. If we just go to the last slide, Alan, I can show people what we do in the redundancy support this package. So in that package, we provide you with all the template letters you need. We provide you with frequently asked questions, the provisional statements that you need, which will have the redundancy calculation on it that you need to make. We give you a checklist, talk about your plan, and we give you the discussion notes that you need to go through in each of the consultation meetings. And we do that by having 3 20-minute calls with you. So we'll start off by finding out what it is that you want to do, explain how to do the business plan. You then send that to us and we'll have a check for it, have a chat to you about that. And then as you go through each phase, we will give you each letter that you need at the time. So we don't give it you all in one go, because it can get confusing. And we don't want you giving the wrong letters out at the wrong time. But we can help you with those letters and make sure you're following best practice and that you're following employment law, because each case is individual. So we've put that package together, and that's £395 plus VAT as a one-off payment, and we'll support you through that restructuring that you need to do. Or say we can work with you on a project basis or as a retained client. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope that's covered, not frightened you too much, but there are lots of things to do when you're restructuring. Whether it's because you're needing to reduce costs, reducing your staff, or wanting to just look at the business in a different way, it's probably going to end up meaning that you've got less people in the company than what you've got now. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you for being here to, firstly, to give